Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have a youth reminder by Sister Asiya. Sister Asiya Mohamed is a pharmacist by profession. She was involved with Hope Pioneers and the Rahmah Mosque during her time in Liverpool. She was a Muslim Scout leader as well, and the leader of Birmingham MAB Youth branch. And today, inshallah, she will be talking to us about the weakness of morals in relation to faith. Jazakallah khair, Asiya, for accepting this, and over to you. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. First of all, assalamu alaikum to all of you. Of course, this would be so much better if I could see all of your faces and get you all to engage, but I guess that's not going to be the case today. So I'm going to focus today's reminder on the imperfections of faith when there is a lack of morality, and specifically focus on character. So if we just start off with what do I mean by morals or morality? In simple terms, we're talking about the principles of right and wrong behaviours. One definition of good moral character is the state of a person's beliefs and values that's considered most beneficial to society. So again, if I could see all your faces and get you all to engage, I'd probably ask you all to give me a few examples. But I guess I'll go at this on my own. So a few examples of good moral character include things such as compassion, honesty, trustworthiness, reliability, someone who has respect for the law, someone who has integrity, and someone who respects the rights of others, and there's an absence of hatred and things like racism. So moving on to the title, the weakness of morals in relation to faith. So let's focus on faith for a moment. Faith in the Arabic word is iman, as I'm sure many of you would know, and it's the power that keeps us away from low attributes and poor acts, and it encourages us to also achieve high attributes of good moral character. So whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called his servants towards virtue or good, or whenever he wanted them to hate evil, he declared it as an essential requirement of faith. And I emphasize the word essential requirement there, so you understand the emphasis that's going to come later on. So the essential requirement of faith. There's an example here that I've pulled out from Surah At-Tawbah, ayah 119. Allah commands man to adopt righteousness and to speak truth. He addresses them as, "O you who have faith, fear Allah and be with the truthful people." So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing a certain group of people. He's addressing the people of faith. So specifically, he's addressing you and he's addressing me. He's addressing those of faith. Also in this ayah, there's a demonstration of commands of Allah. So when Allah, states that an ayah like this, you're expected to listen to and pay attention to what's to come. Here Allah says, "Fear Allah," and it says, "Fear Allah and be truthful to people." So the ayah is deterring you away from dishonesty, and then whenever there's a thought of dishonesty or untruthfulness, fear Him, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah's Messenger, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, explains that when faith is firm and belief is strong, then strong and lasting morals will be developed. However, when the moral character is low, and faith too will then be low. So this is different to when we feel a sense of fluctuating faith. This is when specifically we're talking about when your morals are lacking. That's when your faith will too lack. I want you to think about a person who behaves, for example, in an immodest way, and I'm not talking about in the way they dress. We have enough attention about the word modesty being related to the way we dress. I'm talking, for example, about, let's say for an example, an individual who's absolutely fantastic at playing football, and it's the way in which they represent themselves when asked how good they are, for example. So they could either brag and just be like, "I'm absolutely amazing, I'm the best person on the pitch," or you could have the flip side where they respond and they say, "I enjoy playing football," and how well they are in something is it's quite clear. People already know, and it's quite clear in the way in which they act. So So going back to this statement, think about a person who behaves in an immodest way. I've given you an example of that, and is ill-mannered and who adopts bad habits without caring for other people. The Prophet ﷺ said, modesty and faith, they're like twins. One who gives up one has to lose the other one as well. So if you give up, if you're quite immodest, then your faith is lacking. So what the point here, I think, is that the two come hand in hand, and I think we need to take that on board. Another example is that the Prophet ﷺ once passed by an Ansari who was scolding his brother about his immodesty, and the Prophet advised him, and he said, just let him go. For the one who let him go, as modesty is the branch of faith, and clearly this chap or this brother didn't have modesty. I'm going to move on to how we treat people. So the treatment towards other people is a reflection truly on our own moral character. So whether it's somebody you like, whether it's somebody you dislike, the way in which you treat people, regardless of how you feel towards them or how they treat you, is really a true reflection of our moral character as an individual moral character. So if a man who harasses his neighbour and makes him suffer any kinds of damage, the Prophet ﷺ, it's recorded in Bukhari, was recorded to have said, by Allah, he cannot be a mu'min. By Allah, he cannot be a mu'min. By Allah, he cannot be a mu'min. And for those that don't understand the Arabic words mu'min, mu'min means believer. So the Prophet ﷺ here is saying that the one who mistreats his neighbour isn't a believer, and he emphasizes it 3 times just to show the absolute importance of how important it is to treat the people around you, whether it be your neighbour or other people, well. He was asked, the Prophet ﷺ was asked who, and so he responded, and he said, he who mistreats his neighbour is not safe. So I just wanted to highlight and emphasize here the significance of this statement. Again, talking about how we treat people, whether it be our neighbour, and obviously here in this hadith, it's talking about the neighbour, and also thinking about maybe the opposite of what mistreatment looks like. So to mistreat them, we know clearly what that looks like, and inshallah I pray that we all completely stay away from that. But then there's the flip side. What can you do to gain hasanat? What can you do to be in a closer place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So to be good to your neighbour, to knock on and to ask how they're doing, even if they don't want to talk to you. Find something that you may be having in common with them, especially during this period of time where we've got COVID and we've got we're all doing Ramadan indoors. Just checking up on the person who lives next door to you, just to make sure that they're okay, improves that good moral character. I then made a few notes here about the way in which we talk to people and the words that flow off our tongue. So there's a famous hadith in Bukhari where the Prophet ﷺ says, a person who believes in Allah and the hereafter should speak about good things, or else he should keep quiet. And this is quite a famous hadith. I've heard this so many times, so I'm assuming that many people have also heard it. The Prophet advises his companions to keep away from empty, meaningless talk and the acts that are bad or evil, or in other words, immoral, and the deeds that are quite senseless. So how would we perfect our good qualities and character? By nurturing them and by developing them, and also by being quite mindful of them. So being mindful in the way in which you act and the way in which you behave is quite important to be able to nurture and to develop them. To be mindful, so when you do behave in a certain way, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, during the day, in the middle of the day, just reflect on how what you did or the way in which you behaved may have affected the other person, regardless of how they were with you. Think of, because this isn't about how they are with you, this is about you as an individual and your level of faith. So really just trying to reflect on self often will just make you a bit more aware, and then also gives you the scope or the ability to develop yourself. All of this means that our faith is kept secure and is straightened. So I mentioned earlier that we all have days of fluctuating faith, and that's quite common. We're not always going to be in a state of being at 100% all the time. That's not normal. But we're constantly striving in this, the need to try and perfect ourselves and to attain that kind of level. So it's something we should always reflect on, as I mentioned. Quite an important point is khushu' in salah. Recently I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and she was talking to me about how she felt like she was lacking that kind of connection. So khushu' meaning like the connection that you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in prayer. She was telling me that she felt like she was just lacking this connection, whether it be because we don't have our communities around us at the moment, and we're not praying tarawih together, or there's so many absences in this period of time where we're all told to stay at home and stay away from people. So maybe there's an element there, but also we had a discussion, going back to khushu' in salah, we had a discussion about maybe whether there were any other areas in salah, any other areas outside of salah that impacted how she was, or where she was at inside of salah. So for example, the way in which you behave, the point that I'm trying to make is the way in which you behave outside of your prayer really does have an impact on maybe the relationship that you have, or where you're at in your prayer when you're in salah. So just a reflection point here is that think about, if that's ever something that maybe you experience, just think about maybe, are there any other areas of faith that are lacking outside of your prayer that have an impact on the way in which you connect with Allah inside of your prayer? So is there anything in the way in which you're in your character that is lacking? And if you corrected that, it would impact how you are in your prayer. Since we're on the topic of salah, any individual who calls himself a Muslim but is lazy in offering compulsory prayers. So this is an example, sorry. There's an individual who calls himself Muslim, but he's quite lazy in offering compulsory prayers. But publicly, he acts as if they're very keen on worship, and they're very out there, and they're like high almighty when it comes to being the best of worshippers. They act in a way that is quite contrary to the demands of good character, and therefore in faith. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that to publicly show yourself off to be this amazing person, but actually behind closed doors, or whether it not be behind closed doors, maybe it's public as well, maybe there's no filter, that you mistreat people, that you're quite rude, that you're quite obnoxious. There are many different traits that people could have, the way you outwardly make yourself out to be this phenomenal individual, practicing Muslim, and on the flip side, your character just doesn't match everything that you make out to be. And I think that again, the two, they come hand in hand. Your level of faith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, comes hand in hand with your good character and the development of your good character. The Prophet ﷺ was warned. The Prophet ﷺ has warned us of such people, and we're told to be careful of them. And I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects us all from being amongst them. I also want you to think about the performing the various forms of worship without, on the topic of salah here, without understanding their significance. Sometimes I think we pray, but we don't really quite understand what we're doing in our salah. So trying to find that connection in salah without really trying to understand what you're doing. So understand what we're doing when we're in salah, understand the significance of what you're doing, any form of worship, try to research the significance of it, and try to understand what Allah is asking of us. And just a point to take away, something that I learned many years ago, was that as much as I thought, whilst I was in Liverpool, after I finished this degree, that's it, I finished, I'll get my degree, I'll put it in my back pocket, and that'll be the end of my education, as per se. But actually the truth is that education is it's a long life thing. It's something that you will be doing throughout your life. You're constantly learning. I think when we go into the schooling system, school, secondary school, college, university, we think that that's it, you've achieved everything. But the truth is that that's just the beginning. That's the beginning of a lot that there is to learn. And the more you learn, subhanAllah, the more you realize how little you know. So going back to my point, thinking of a child, for example, we've got a 3 to 4 year old child, they copy the movements of their parents, and they're quite, some of them are able to recite Quran, but compare the child to you and I. Whether you're the age of 14, 13, whether you're age of 30 or 40, compare that 3 or 4 year old child with you and I. You and I have understanding, we have the ability to understand, we have the ability to learn and progress and develop. So when we talk about salah, we need to try and think about, we're not this 3 to 4 year old child who says or who copies motion. Prayer is beyond motion, and it doesn't benefit the believer or meet the purpose of salah when all we're doing is just following without true understanding, without trying to seek some sort of understanding. And that doesn't mean that every single day you're going to be seeking to understand, but it does mean that you have the intention to and that you try to. So going back to good character and relating it to prayer. So the best way of offering salah or performing other forms of worship is when you are persistent with working towards achieving a high moral character. And how you are in prayer, again, I mentioned this earlier, is how you are in prayer is quite reflective of how you are outside of prayer. And that it's not a black and white. I'm not saying that's firm and that's the way it is all the time, but I am saying that when you feel like you're quite distant in salah for quite some time, take a few steps out of it, take a few steps back, and just reflect on where you're at in your life outside of your prayer time. Because if you compare how much time you give to salah in comparison to the rest of your 24 hours of a day, there's a lot going on in your time outside of salah. Think about where you're at outside of your prayer, and compare that to where you're at inside of your salah. Think about the way in which you talk to people, and the way in which you address them, and think about the words that roll off your tongue. I think sometimes we don't even realize that what we may say to people could be quite offensive to them, or could be quite hurtful. We don't know how that individual has taken that, the words that you said, whether they've taken it to heart or not. So be quite conscious of your words, and try your best always to treat people well. So this type of person's prayer is useful. So the one who, going back a step, persistent. So the one who is persistent with working towards achieving a high moral character outside of salah, this person's prayer is quite useful because they've got better connection. But if you're deprived of the attribute of trying to, the attribute of trying to constantly achieve higher moral character, then the worships tend to be quite empty because, there isn't that connection. And also with poor moral character, as mentioned earlier, the two, faith and moral character, come hand in hand. They're not separate entities. They're very much one of the same entity. So something to reflect on. So it's narrated, again, another hadith. So it's narrated by Imam Ahmed. One person asked the Prophet ﷺ, "O Messenger of Allah, a certain woman is very famous for her prayers, fasting, and many charities, but she talks rudely with her neighbours. Tell me, what will be her fate?" And so the Rasul ﷺ responded, and he said, "She will go to hell." And then the person asked, "O Messenger of Allah, Ya Rasulullah, another woman does not do much of prayers, and she doesn't do much of fasting, but she gives these little pieces of cheese in charity, and does not harm her neighbours." And the Prophet ﷺ, he replied, and he said, "She is of paradise." So I want you to just think of the reply that he gives. Of the high value attached to good character in this statement here. So firstly, charities is something that we must all do. And those of you that heard Esma mention earlier that, yes, I came from a background of charity, and the sweetness that comes from it, and you get so much more back, subhanAllah. Even when you feel like you're giving so much, you're getting so much more back. But that's not the point. Let's go back to the point. I've got that Ramadan brain and the fasting brain, at the moment, just kind of dipped in, trying to dip myself back out. So let's go back. So firstly, charity. It's something, so this lady that's being discussed here in this statement is the second lady, is one who gives little pieces of cheese in charity, but she does not harm her neighbour. So charity is something we must all do, because its benefits reaches out to society and it impacts society on a grand scale. And it's something that the communities should really focus on doing together. Whereas if you look at prayer and fasting, they're quite individual forms of worship, even though, yes, you can do them together. You can do like congregational prayers, but they're quite individual. It's an individual thing. Whereas charity is something you're doing for other people. You're doing to strengthen your society, and also the skills that you build from that. The Prophet ﷺ did not merely answer a casual question here. This isn't just a casual question that was asked. That explains the relationship between morality and religion. It shows its connection with the correct forms of worship and the forms the basis of reform and improvement in our society and the world as a whole, and how to attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in achieving paradise in the next life. So charity is not just about money, and it's not just about, you know, giving and sadaqah. There's so much that you can do if you don't have money, and even if you do have money, give it, and also given your time and given your effort. Okay, so then I've got this other section here that talks about poverty. So what does true poverty look like? So one day the Prophet ﷺ asked his companions whether they knew who was poor, and they answered that, I guess how you and I would probably answer at first sight, is the one that's poor is the one that doesn't have money. But the Prophet ﷺ said, in my ummah, the poor is the man who would appear on the Day of Judgment before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He had offered prayer, he had paid zakah, he had observed fast, but he would have abused someone, he would have falsely accused someone, he would have unauthorizedly taken someone else's property, he would have murdered someone, he would have hit somebody. All his virtues would be given to his victims. If his virtues are finished before his wicked deeds are finished, then the errors and sins of the victims would be given to him, and he would be thrown into hell. And that's from Sahih Muslim. If we just take that for a moment and just reflect on it, there are so many elements in this one statement that you could reflect on. Our concept of poverty is a little bit flawed or skewed. If your first initial instinct is that, you know, and I know mine was initially, poverty in our day and age, you know, poverty is someone who doesn't have money or is struggling financially. But take that for a moment. When the Prophet ﷺ talks about poverty in his ummah, he's talking there about the one who may have gained all good in the world, but also did so much wrong, and that we're talking about his behavior towards other people. So think about that for a moment. Also, I want to imagine, for example, you've got an owner of, I don't know, maybe a bike company, and they have goods worth maybe about £1,000, but they're actually in debt by £10,000. When you compare that £1,000 to that £10,000, they're still not going to make it even. So that's what it's like on the Day of Judgment when you go and you come with all these good deeds, but the deeds that are not good are so much more grander, or, you know, it weighs it, like the balance is completely off skewed. It's something to reflect on. That all, like, I think the last statement here is that if his virtues are finished, so if, you know, your virtues are finished before his wicked deeds are finished, then the errors of the sins of the victims would be given to him. So not only do you go to the akhirah carrying your own bad deeds, but then if you've run out of all your good deeds and you've had to give them away on the Day of Judgment, you'll be then taking the bad deeds of other people. So building and constantly focusing on good character and development of good character, inshallah, moves you away from this kind of, you know, being in this category of people on the Day of Judgment. A religious man who offers certain prayers or performs certain forms of worship, but even after that he behaves rudely with people, they treat the poor and helpless people cruelly, how can we call him righteous? So going back again to good moral character, the Prophet ﷺ explains by quoting an example. He said that the best moral character melts errors like water, and bad morals spoil man's record as vinegar spoils honey. Now, I never tried putting vinegar in honey, okay? But I think you get the gist. Honey is quite sweet and vinegar is very bitter. So vinegar would spoil honey if you mix the two together, or if you put the two together. And that's what bad moral character looks like. But good moral character is a little bit like, you know, it melts errors away. So when you have wronged, it will boost you back up to do good. And it's a little bit like water. That's what the example is here. And it just made me reflect on a river and what a river looks like, and why the river is described as pure, and why you can do wudu from a river. And for anyone who's studied geography, I absolutely loved geography when I was at school. It's a little bit like erosion. It's like when that fast flow of water is brushing past all the rocks and the cleanliness of the water. Sometimes you can look down at a river and quite literally you can see the bottom of the river just by how clean and pure it is. So the relationship between faith and morality is clearly shown in the hadith I'm about to mention to you by the Prophet ﷺ, and it's recorded in Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, the man who has these three habits is a hypocrite, even if he observes fast, even if he offers prayers, and even if he performs umrah, and even if he calls himself a Muslim. So one, when he talks, he speaks untruth. When he makes a promise, he does not keep it. When he is given something in truth, he commits dishonesty. It's also recorded that he said, the Rasul said, there are three signs of a hypocrite. When he talks, he speaks untruth. When he makes a promise, he does not keep it. And when he makes a contract, he deceives, although he may be offering prayers, observing fast, and calling himself a Muslim. And then again in Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ says, there are four habits, in whoever they are found, he will be a complete hypocrite. If any one of these habits are found in a person, he will have one habit of disruption or an area of disruption until he gives it up. One being when something is given to him in trust, he commits dishonesty. 2, when he talks, he tells lies. 3, when he makes a contract, he is deceptive. And 4, when he quarrels, so when he's in a disagreement, a fallout, or whatever it may be, he starts being abusive. And when you think about abuse, this could be in any form. This could be in physical, this could be in a mental form, this could be in an emotional form of abuse, this could be in the way in which we talk to people abusively. So when we allow bad habits to fester away within us, we allow the loss of our good moral character, and we are coming away from our religion. So keep that in mind. How is it possible that a man should belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or belong to the ummah, and at the same time he's quite corrupt? Question to think about. When there's a disruption in your faith or in your iman, ask yourself whether a bad habit has been festering away, whether it be a physical act, but especially the ones that we don't talk about, which is our thoughts. We don't tend to talk about the way in which we think and whether that will fester into bad habits, or even whether our thoughts are festering. So your thoughts are something that we should consider also here. And then some positive points to focus on is to focus on trust, focus on good speech, focus on being truthful in all aspects you can, focus on honesty, focus on being kind and compassionate, and always aspire to be better. So just to come in and summarize, so I was thinking to myself when I was preparing this talk about how much we emphasize the 5 pillars of Islam when we're teaching young children about Islam, or how often the 5 pillars of Islam comes to light. But when I was reading about good character, I realized it's just not as emphasized as much as the 5 pillars. Yes, I'm not negating the 5 pillars and their importance, but I am saying that good character has a very high standing. It has a very, very, very high standing in relation to Iman, has a very high standing in relation to faith. And as mentioned here in this talk, the two don't come apart, the two are together. So it's really important to reflect on good character. One of the examples I gave you earlier was about the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ was asked about 2 different types of women, and woman 1 goes to hell and woman 2 goes to Jannah. And when we ask ourselves why, we're talking about the way in which they treated their neighbor and the way in which they gave. So it was mainly the way in which they treated that differentiated them, because woman 1 was the one who did everything well, worship wise, prayed or gave in charity, etc., etc. But they were awful to their neighbor. And woman 2 it was the opposite. Again, fasting brain. So again, my main focus here is to summarize that good character holds such significance, and what you do outside of Salah could impact how you are inside of Salah and your khushu' in Salah. So try to, if you do feel emptiness in Salah, focus on what character traits, how you behave outside of Salah, and what you could change or what you could develop in your character, and inshallah that will improve, or you can bring that back into your Salah. And if you're lacking, I've mentioned this already, it's lacking connection in Salah, ask yourself. We've done that. So Jazakallah kulla khair. That is the end of my talk. It was quite brief. Firstly, all of this, everything that I've said today is merely a reminder to myself first. I read it over 1 million times to make sure that I reminded myself first. And I think it's always important to remind yourself and to remind others. But again, this was a reminder to myself first. And I hope, inshallah, you've all benefited. And I pray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always reminds us and makes us amongst those that reflect on our character and often, and always strive towards good moral character. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Jazakallah khair. Can you hear me, sister?
I can.
Yes, brilliant. Okay, alhamdulillah. Thank you very much for this beautiful reminder, and I do apologize for everyone on behalf of Zoom for the there's an issue with the with Zoom today. So if you didn't hear it all, you can always find it on Liverpool Muslims. We are having problems with Zoom, which is not a great thing, but hopefully just today. Jazakallah khair again, Sister Asiya, and just to remind you all about what we have for today, we have the Science of the Quran at 6 o'clock by Sheikh Ahmed Al-Waqidi. After that, at 7:30, we have Feed Your Soul by Sheikh Mohamed Al-Shar'i, followed by the Quran recitation. And that's it for tonight, inshallah. For those who have registered for the Quran competition, you will receive an email with the slot or the exact time for the participants, inshallah, very soon. And Jazakumullah khair, thank you all for joining in, and thank you again, Sister Asiya, for your beautiful reminder. Thank you all. Jazakumullah khair.